She was born in Somalia to strict Muslim parents, but is now an outspoken critic of Islam. My guest today escaped an arranged marriage to become a serial refugee. She sought asylum in the Netherlands and became a Dutch MP. She helped to make a provocative film about the treatment of women in Islamic society. The film's director was later killed, and she was subjected to death threats. Despite that, she continues to attack the religion as fatally flawed and on a collision course with the West. Ayaan Hirsi, welcome to Hard Talk. You've written that there's already a clash between Islam and the West, and we are, in some sense, already at war. That's a very strong assertion.
And it's not only my assertion. There's been a debate since the 11th of September 2001 here in the United States and in Europe. And there is a school of thought that holds that there is indeed a clash of civilizations and that there is a war going on. And there is another school of thought that says that is not the case. We're only talking about a fringe group of individuals who have hijacked the religion of peace. And I disagree with that assertion, of course.
You've come down very firmly on one side, haven't you? You back up your tough stance in your new book, Nomad, by saying Islam is not just a belief, it's a way of life, a violent way of life. Islam is imbued with violence and it encourages violence.
Well, Islam has a religious dimension where people are encouraged to be charitable and hospitable, to pray and fast, and go to Mecca once in their lives if they can afford it. I have no problems with that aspect of Islam. However, Islam also has a political side that encourages jihad and a social side that discriminates between men and women and elevates gay people into a group of people who should be hunted down and killed. And it's with that political and social aspect of Islam that I have a problem with, and I think you do too.
But many Muslims would disagree, though, with you when you talk about the view of violence. The Quran, for example, makes it clear that it's wrong to take innocent life. It says, fight for the sake of Allah against those who fight against you, but begin not hostilities. Allah loveth not aggressors.
The first part of the Quran, at least that was revealed, as he claimed, Prophet Muhammad, in Mecca, you will find a lot of peaceful and charitable verses there, but as Muhammad becomes a conqueror and as his following grows in Medina, you find that parts of the Quran have changed and indeed call for violence and introduce a law, Sharia law, that is implemented today in the 21st century in places like Saudi Arabia. The Taliban want to introduce it into Afghanistan, in parts of Pakistan, Iran. So Sharia law, Islam as a political legal system affects millions and millions of people, and there are movements in the West, in the United States, in the UK and other European countries who are lobbying for the introduction of Sharia. That affects us all. That is the empirics that we live in. So there's more data that comes that supports my assertions than the assertion that it's a religion of peace and it's been hijacked by.
But the very well-respected Muslim scholar of international law, Tahir al-Qadri, says any act by a suicide bomber which causes the death of innocent people is forbidden by Sharia, utterly and clearly forbidden. According to the laws of Islam, he says, it is a lesser wrong to spare 99% of sinners than it is to kill even one innocent person. So he's certainly taking issue with you.
He's taking issue with me, but I think he should take issue with the fact that just in the last 2 months, 2,000 people have been killed, and I'm not counting the 80 who were killed in Pakistan last Saturday, and 3,000 people wounded in the name of Islam by people who hold the Quran and the Hadith and interpret it differently. And it's that kind of reality that we should not look away from.
The people doing that are a minority, though, aren't they? Certainly the views that violence is acceptable, that it must be pursued, that wouldn't be taken on by the vast majority of Muslims.
It is a minority, fortunately, today. But we know in places, for instance, like Iran, that that radical movement that wants to take Iranian society back to the 7th century started out as a minority. It was only 19 men on the 11th of September who toppled the Twin Towers and attacked Washington and have us all go into war. The United States is now involved in 2 wars. So minorities, small groups of men, when driven by a passionate conviction in the name of their religion, can cause and do a lot of damage.
Islam doesn't have a monopoly on violence, though, does it? What about Christians who carried out the Crusades or the Spanish Inquisition, or in modern times, less than 2 decades ago, carried out a war in Bosnia against Muslims?
Well, that is a question that is always hurled at me, but that was centuries ago. And
what about Bosnia?
Christianity.
Bosnia more recently, of course, was under 20 years ago, when you had on one side Christians and on the other side Muslims.
Well, the Bosnian conflict was an ethnic conflict, at least as far as the Serbians were concerned, and that is now over. But the Islamic jihadist movement that has taken root in Bosnia, in Nigeria, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan is not yet over. It's only growing. And talking of minorities, what is amazing, and this is, I mean, the same 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, what we've been seeing is that the so-called mainstream moderate Muslims remain silent in the face of these small groups that they say have hijacked their religion. And that kind of lends it a very sinister aura of legitimacy to the radicals and to the terrorists.
How much of your intense criticism of Islam is drawn from your own experience? I mean, you were born into a fairly religious family in Somalia.
The deaths that I just talked about, the 2,000 people who were killed in the last 2 months, have nothing to do with my experience as a Muslim.
It must have shaped your outlook, though.
What has shaped my outlook is the 5 years that I spent in the University of Leiden, where I was told to separate fact from opinion. And the more facts that we see, the killings, the explosions, the attempts to kill innocent people, the treatment of women, and the fact that this is justified over and over again by the perpetrators in the name of Muhammad and in the name of the Quran, that is something that is empirical, that is for everyone to see and has nothing to do with my background in Somalia.
Are you really saying, though, you weren't affected by your childhood, by the fact you were forced to undergo female circumcision when you were very young, by the fact you had to run away from an arranged marriage?
I was affected by it when I was asked in the Netherlands to look into why Muslims are not assimilating, and I found there similar experiences and observed similar practices among the Dutch Muslims, that girls were pulled out of school, that female genital mutilation was going on, that their parents emphasized the virginity and chastity of a girl more than her education. And I shared that experience, but I'm out of it, I'm free, I'm emancipated, and I'm only speaking for those poor girls who are not, and the girls that we look away from. You know the number of forced marriages in the UK, you know the number of honor killings in the UK, and I use the fact that I grew up in a Muslim society that valued those things to show you this is happening in the UK. Don't be complacent about it. Don't look away from it. And it's in the US and in the rest of Europe.
But you obviously were affected. I'm interested to know why you won't accept you were affected, because you say in your book, for example, that you were in effect estranged from your father because you turned away from Islam, and you weren't reunited with him really until he was on his deathbed, and that did affect you, and that's why you decided to write about your experiences.
I think that is a very superficial reading of the book. I try to show in Nomad the family dynamics that as yet has not been explored by sociologists and psychologists. The outlook in terms of sexuality, violence and money that people who grow up in